Reflection can be a dangerous thing when the past is something you've been trying to outrun for years. Witness the chrome-sharp reality of justice as it finally catches up to those who thought they were safe. Subscribe today and watch the ultimate price of deception unfold.
The night my father was buried, my sister handed me a manila envelope and said, "Dad wanted you to have this." Inside was a single key and a folded document. The deed to a property I had never heard of, a commercial storage unit on the edge of Bakersfield, California. 4,200 square feet of corrugated metal walls and cracked concrete floors, registered in my name as of that morning. My sister got the house in Pasadena, the one I grew up in, the one with the magnolia tree in the backyard that my father planted the year I was born. She got the savings account, the truck, and the furniture. She stood in the living room 3 days after the funeral, already measuring the walls for new paint colors, her husband nodding along behind her like a shadow with an opinion. I got a padlock key in a building I had never seen. "It's probably full of junk," my sister said, not even looking up from her phone. "Dad used to store stuff out there. Old tools. Maybe some equipment from the shop. You can probably get a few $100s for the scrap." Her husband laughed. Actually laughed. A short, flat sound like a cabinet door closing. I did not say anything. I had learned a long time ago that saying something only gave them more material to work with. I drove out to Bakersfield the next morning. I had a suitcase in the back seat because I no longer had anywhere to stay. My sister had made it clear, with the kind of politeness that is somehow colder than cruelty, that the house was hers now and she needed space to process her grief. She said that last part with her hand over her heart. She had been taking acting classes for 2 years, and it showed. The storage property was off a county road about 6 miles outside the city. I passed a feed store, a trailer park, a wind-battered diner with a hand-painted sign that had been faded by the sun to near illegibility. Then I turned onto a gravel path and followed it until the building appeared. It was ugly. I will not pretend otherwise. The roof had a visible sag on the east side. The exterior walls were streaked with rust from the fasteners, long orange lines running downward like something weeping. The lot around it was scrub and cracked dirt. One of the exterior floodlights had been knocked sideways, probably by wind, and hung at an angle from its bracket like it had given up trying. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at it, then I got out. The padlock on the main door was heavy, commercial grade, and the key turned smoothly. That was the first thing I noticed. The lock was well maintained. Everything else looked neglected, but someone had been taking care of this lock. I filed that away and pulled the door open. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew, not the damp wood smell of a place that had been closed too long. It was oil. Clean machine oil, the kind you use when you're taking care of something mechanical. Dry and faintly metallic, and underneath it, something else. Leather, maybe, and something I could not name right away. The interior was dark. I found the light panel inside the door and flipped the switches. 6 overhead fluorescents flickered on, one at a time, and I stood very still. The space had been divided. The front third was what you would expect, shelving units with hardware, a workbench against the wall, some cardboard boxes, a rusted rolling toolbox. But the back 2/3 of the building were separated by a partition wall. Plywood and 2x4s built flush against both side walls and up to the ceiling, solid, deliberate. There was a door in the center of it and another padlock. Same key. I almost did not try it. My sister's voice was in my head. Old tools, scrap metal, a few $100s. But the lock on the main door had been maintained. And the building had a utility account. I had found that detail in the envelope with the deed. A monthly electric bill paid on auto draft. For a place this size with this few lights, that bill should have been almost nothing. I had checked before I drove out. It was $460 a month for a storage building with 6 fluorescent lights. I put the key in the second padlock. My father had been a quiet man. He ran an auto shop in Glendale for 31 years. He taught me to change oil when I was 9 and to read a torque spec sheet when I was 12. My sister had no interest in any of it. She thought the shop was embarrassing, the way you feel about something that works too hard and does not apologize for it. She never came to the shop. She called it the garage, like that diminished it somehow. My mother left when I was 7, and after that it was just the 3 of us, my father, my sister, and me. My sister was older by 4 years, and she had decided early on that she was my father's favorite, which meant anything he gave me was something she was owed. A birthday gift, a compliment, an afternoon of his time. She kept track of all of it with the precision of someone who intends to collect. I worked in the shop every summer through high school. My sister went to a performing arts program in Scottsdale. My father paid for it without complaint. He paid for her apartment after college, her car, 2 separate rounds of what she called finding herself, which seemed to require significant funding. He never said a word about any of it. He also never told me about what was behind this wall. The second padlock opened. I pushed the door inward and found the light switch by memory. I do not know why. It was just there, and my hand found it the way your hand finds things in a room you know without knowing you know it. The lights came on. There were 7 of them. 7 cars parked in 2 rows, covered in fitted fabric covers the color of charcoal gray. They were positioned with space between them, each one angled slightly, each cover smoothed down tight. The concrete floor under them was clean. Not just swept, clean. The walls back here were insulated. There were 2 climate control units mounted near the ceiling, which explained the electric bill. Humidity controlled, temperature stable. My father had not been storing junk. My father had been storing something he loved more than he ever said out loud. I walked to the nearest car and lifted the cover from the front. The hood was dark blue, and even under fluorescent light it had depth to it, the kind of finish that took time to maintain. I pulled the cover off entirely. It was a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, dark Highland green. I knew that color the way I knew my own name. My father had a framed photograph of one on the wall of his office at the shop, the same photograph for as long as I could remember. I had asked him about it once when I was maybe 10 years old, and he had said, "That's the one Steve McQueen drove in Bullitt." Then he had gone back to whatever he was reading, and I had understood that the conversation was over, but that the photograph meant something serious. I stood next to the car for a long time, then I went to the next one. A 1969 Dodge Charger, black, the kind of car that looks like it was designed by someone who was angry about physics. The third was a 1970 Chevelle SS454, red, with a hood that seemed almost aggressive in its dimensions. The fourth was smaller, lower, a 1965 Shelby Cobra 427, white with blue racing stripes, the paint still sharp. The fifth was a Ferrari 275 GTB, long-nosed and red in a way that seemed different from ordinary red, as if the color had opinions. The sixth was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, 2-tone white and turquoise, mint condition, the chrome gleaming under the lights as though it had just been polished. The seventh car was under a separate cover at the back of the room, and I almost did not look at it because I was already overwhelmed. But I pulled the cover off. It was a 1963 Aston Martin DB5. Silver. The kind of car that appears in films and looks like a prop because you cannot believe something that beautiful was built by people going to work in the morning. I sat down on the concrete floor. I am not a person who cries easily. My father was not a person who raised easy criers. I sat on the floor between a Shelby Cobra and a Ferrari, and I pressed my hands flat on the cold concrete and I breathed, because I understood something in that moment that took a few minutes to find words for. My father had known. He had watched my sister take and take and take for 30 years, and he had never said anything to her, and he had never said anything to me, but he had known. He had built this wall, he had maintained these locks. He had kept the climate control running quietly for years, probably, paying that bill every month without any explanation anywhere. He had put my name on the deed. He had not given me junk. He had given me everything he had saved. I got up off the floor. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I stopped thinking like a grieving daughter, and I started thinking like someone who had grown up in an auto shop and knew what things were worth. I took photographs of everything. Every car, every angle, every VIN plate I could find. Then I drove back toward the city and found a diner with Wi-Fi, and I sat in the booth and I started working. I am not a classic car appraiser, but I know how to research, and I know how to research, and I know how to read. I spent 4 hours in that diner booth. I ordered coffee twice and a piece of pie I did not eat. I built a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced auction records, dealer listings, provenance documentation requirements. I found 3 appraisers with strong reputations in California and made note of their contact information. What I found in those 4 hours changed the shape of everything I thought I understood about my father and about money and about the word patience. The Mustang alone, if it was a genuine Bullitt-era Highland Green fastback in documented condition, had comparables in the range of $3 to $4 million. I did not let myself believe that number yet. I wrote it down and kept going. The Aston Martin DB5 in documented original condition had sold at auction 3 times in the past decade. The lowest of those sales was $2.1 million. The highest was over $3 million, depending on provenance. The Ferrari 275 GTB had sold at a major auction 2 years prior for $1.8 million. There were only around 450 ever made. The Shelby Cobra 427, if original and not a replica, and the quality of what I had seen suggested it was not a replica, had sold at auction for figures that started at $1 million and went considerably higher depending on documentation. I closed my laptop and looked out the window of the diner at the parking lot. My sister had sent me 3 texts while I was sitting there. The first asked if I had been to the storage unit yet. The second said she had been thinking, and she believed Dad would have wanted the family to share whatever was out there, because family is family. The third said she and her husband were planning to drive out on Saturday to take a look themselves. I read all 3 messages. Then I put my phone face down on the table and ordered another coffee. There is a particular kind of clarity that arrives when you stop being afraid. I had been afraid of my sister for most of my life. Not physically, but in the way you are afraid of someone who controls the temperature of every room they walk into. Who decides what is appropriate to feel and when? Who has decided that your value is fixed and lower than hers and that this is simply the natural order, not a choice she makes every day? I was not afraid anymore. The next morning I called an appraiser named Gerald Okafor, who had 20 years of experience with American and European collector cars, and whose name appeared in the acknowledgments of 2 books I found referenced in auction catalogs. I explained the situation. I told him I had inherited a private collection in Bakersfield and needed professional appraisal before I made any decisions. I did not tell him about my sister. I did not tell him about the wall. He came out 3 days later. I watched him walk through that back room for 2 hours. He wore cotton gloves and carried a flashlight and a clipboard, and he did not say very much. He checked under cars. He looked at stampings and castings. He photographed things I had not thought to photograph. He made notes I could not read from where I stood. When he was done, he stood in the center of the room and looked at me. "Where did your father get these?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "He ran an auto shop for 30 years. I think he collected them over a long time." Gerald Okafor nodded slowly. "The Mustang," he said, "has documentation that places it in provenance from a private collector who purchased it in 1972. There is a logbook in the glove compartment. I need to verify the chain of title, but if it checks out, you are looking at a figure that will surprise you." "I've done some research," I said. "Then you have some idea," he said. "But your research probably did not include the Ferrari. There's a stamped plate behind the dash that I want to have a specialist confirm, but if I'm reading it correctly, the build date and configuration match a specific allocation year. That changes the valuation considerably." I asked him to write me a formal appraisal report. He said he would have a preliminary figure to me within 10 days. I did not tell my sister any of this. She texted again on Friday, then called on Saturday morning when I did not respond to the text. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was warm and concerned. She was worried about me, she said. She just wanted to make sure I was okay. Grief does strange things to people. She had read an article about it. She said she and her husband would be out on Sunday and we could go through things together as a family. I called a locksmith on Saturday afternoon and had the locks changed, both of them. On Sunday, I was not there when they arrived. I know this because my sister called me 7 times between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon and then texted me a message that was no longer warm or concerned. She said I was being childish. She said Dad would be ashamed. She said the property was in my name, but that did not mean it was not a family asset, and she had spoken to someone, a friend, who knew about estate law, and things were not as simple as I thought. I sent her message to the estate attorney I have retained the previous Thursday. I want to be precise about the timeline here, because precision matters. Gerald Okafor sent me his preliminary appraisal report 11 days after his visit. I read it 3 times. Then I sat outside on the step of the storage building in the evening light, and I read it a 4th time. The 7 cars, collectively, had a preliminary estimated value of between $9.4 million and $12.8 million, depending on provenance confirmation and auction market conditions. The Mustang alone came in at a preliminary figure of $3.2 to $3.8 million pending title verification. The Ferrari was the other anchor. Gerald had confirmed his read on the bill plate, and the number reflected it. He recommended approaching 2 specific auction houses. He said the collection, if brought to market correctly, would generate significant interest. I chose a well-regarded auction house that had handled major collector car sales. I contacted them through Gerald. They sent a representative within 2 weeks. The representative, a woman named Patricia, who spoke with the measured calm of someone who has seen extraordinary things and learned not to visibly react, walked through the collection, and then sat across from me at the workbench in the front room and outlined what a consignment arrangement would look like. The process took 4 months. Documentation, title verification, provenance research, catalog preparation, condition reports. I paid storage fees and my own living expenses from my savings. I had enough for about 6 months if I was careful, and I was careful. I found a short-term rental in Bakersfield, a studio apartment above a hardware store that cost less per month than my sister's gym membership. My sister contacted me 8 more times during those 4 months. Her attorney sent a letter in month 2, suggesting that my father's estate had not been properly administered and that my sister had potential claims against certain assets. My attorney responded. The letter did not come again. My father had been meticulous. The deed was clean. The title on every car was clean. The documentation was thorough. He had clearly spent considerable time over many years making sure that what he intended to give me would actually reach me without interference. He had just never told me he was doing it. I think about that sometimes. Why he didn't tell me. I think he was protecting the plan, that telling me would have required explaining things about my sister that he did not want to say out loud, and that he preferred to let the work speak. My father was like that. He showed you things instead of telling you. The auction was held on a Friday evening in Los Angeles. I sat in the back. I wore the same navy blazer I had worn to my father's funeral because it was the nicest thing I owned. I had not told my sister about the auction. I had not told her anything for 2 months. The collection sold over 3 hours. I watched the numbers on the board and I stayed very still. The total, after commission, was $11.2 million. I called Gerald from the parking lot afterward. He congratulated me. He said my father had had exceptional taste and exceptional patience. I thanked him and stood in the parking lot for a while longer, not ready to get in my car yet. My sister found out the way people find out things they were not meant to find, through a gap in information they were not watching. A mutual acquaintance who had seen the auction catalog. She called me that night, very late, her voice at a register I had not heard from her before. Not angry exactly, more like a person who has reached for something that has already been moved. You sold them, she said. You sold them. They were mine to sell, I said. Dad left them to me, I said. He had 30 years to leave them to both of us. He left them to me. There was a long pause. I could hear her husband in the background, his voice low. She said something to him that I couldn't make out. That money is family money, she said finally. The house in Pasadena is family money, I said. The savings account is family money. The truck is family money. I didn't contest any of it. This is mine. She started to say something else and I said, I have to go, and I ended the call. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had expected something more like triumph. What I felt instead was quieter than that, something like completion, or like a door closing firmly on a room you no longer need to enter. My father had spent a lifetime building something in the dark, quietly, without acknowledgement, and it had reached me the way he intended. That was the thing that stayed with me. In the months that followed, I was deliberate about every decision. I paid taxes. I set aside a substantial reserve. I invested a portion with a financial advisor who came recommended by 2 separate people I trusted. With another portion, I purchased a small commercial property in the Central Valley. Not glamorous, not a penthouse, nothing that would have impressed my sister. A building that needed work that I understood. That made sense to me, the way things make sense when you grew up learning how things actually function. I enrolled in a continuing education program for property management because I wanted to understand what I owned. I hired carefully. I worked long hours, which did not bother me because I had always worked long hours. The difference now was that I was working for something that would not be taken from me. My sister and I have not spoken in 8 months. I am aware that this is its own kind of loss, different from the loss of my father, but present nonetheless. I do not think she is entirely wrong to feel that life was unfair. I think life was unfair for a long time, in directions she did not look at carefully. I do not expect that to change. What I keep coming back to is this. My father knew what he had. He knew what the wall was for. He maintained the locks and paid the bill and kept the temperature stable year after year, trusting that the key would eventually reach the person he meant to have it. He was not a man who said much. He said it in other ways. I still have the photograph from his office wall. The dark green Mustang, the one from the film, the one that looked like it had been built specifically for someone who understood what speed and purpose and precision looked like when they were the same thing. I have it in my office now. Same frame. Same photograph. Every morning when I come in, I see it, and I understand what he was trying to tell me all those years that he didn't say anything at all.